Let's dive right into this. We're looking at a really powerful first-person story about living with histrionic personality disorder. And honestly, it's a story that's probably going to challenge everything you think you know about the classic attention seeker. So the source kicks things off with this question right here. It's asking us to look past the performance, you know? It's suggesting that all that magnetic energy we see, maybe it isn't really confidence. Maybe it's more like a distress signal. And this is the absolute heart of what we're talking about today. The difference between wanting attention and needing it just to feel like you exist. It's not a preference. It's a deep, urgent, foundational compulsion. Our narrator paints a picture for us, a scene we all probably recognize. They're 24, they walk into a party, and pretty soon they're the gravitational center of the whole room. To everyone else, they look like they're having the time of their life. But on the inside, they're running from the quiet, from the place where a sense of self is supposed to be. And then this happens. A single, quiet comment from a friend. And it wasn't meant to be mean, it was said kindly, but it just sliced right through the whole performance. This one sentence becomes the spark for a full-blown crisis, but it's also the beginning of a journey to actually understand what's going on. So, what even is histrionic personality disorder? For real, let's try and separate the clinical reality from the, pop culture caricature we all have in our heads. Yeah, we all know the caricature, right? The manipulative, dramatic soap opera villain. But the reality is, it's a serious cluster B personality disorder. The behaviors, they aren't coming from a place of enjoying chaos. They're driven by this desperate, compulsive need for validation from the outside, just to hold on to a very fragile sense of self. And this isn't some super rare thing. HPD affects an estimated 1 to 3% of the population. And yeah, historically, it was diagnosed way more often in women, but today, that's pretty much understood to be a reflection of diagnostic bias, not an actual difference between men and women. Okay, this slide right here gives us the perfect metaphor for understanding HPD. I want you to think of your self-worth like a battery. For most people, it's an internal battery. It kind of self-charges. But for someone with HPD, that battery doesn't hold a charge on its own. It has to be constantly plugged into the attention and the reactions of other people. And this just explains it so perfectly. Let's go back to that party. The narrator's hours of crying afterward, that wasn't just them being overly dramatic. It was a complete system crash. The friend's comment basically unplugged the cord. The battery just ran out, and that core sense of self just destabilized. So, this brings us to the 8 official diagnostic criteria for HPD. But if we look at them through that battery metaphor, they stop being just a list of symptoms. They become 8 unconscious survival strategies. Every single one of these behaviors, whether it's provocative interactions or really theatrical storytelling, they're all tools. They are automatic, unconscious strategies that were developed over time to capture and hold on to the attention needed to keep that battery charged, and ultimately to feel real. These aren't character flaws, they're adaptations. But, and this is the deep tragedy of these survival strategies, they often end up destroying the very thing the person wants most in the world, which is a real, stable connection with other people. This timeline just lays out the painful, almost predictable cycle in relationships. It starts out electric, intoxicating. But then, as the newness wears off, the need for attention escalates into drama. The partner gets exhausted, feels more like an audience member, and starts to pull back. And that withdrawal, that's like unplugging the cord. And it triggers a crisis, which just creates this devastating feedback loop. And friendships? They often go down a similar path. They start off super vibrant, but over time, they become unbalanced. One person's needs, one person's crises start to suck up all the oxygen in the room. And eventually, the friend has to say what that friend at the party said. This is just exhausting. So where does an adaptation like this even come from? And maybe more importantly, is recovery actually possible? What does that path even look like? Well, research points pretty consistently to early childhood, to environments where attention was conditional or just totally unpredictable. A child learns a really powerful lesson in that environment. Being my normal self gets me ignored, but being dramatic, being emotional, that gets me the connection and the care I need to survive. This quote, it just reframes the whole thing perfectly. This isn't about being vain or being a bad person. It's a developmental adaptation. It is a child's solution to an impossible problem, and it's still running on an adult's operating system long after that original problem is gone. For a lot of people, the road to recovery only starts after a huge crisis. When the relationships have failed, the friendships are gone, and they're left totally alone to face this terrifying question. So therapies that really work, like DBT or schema therapy, they focus on two main things. First, building what you could call internal scaffolding, a sense of self that doesn't need an audience to exist. And second, learning to tolerate the massive anxiety that comes with just being ordinary, with just being in a room without needing to be its center. Now, if any of this is hitting close to home, either for you or for someone you care about, the source offers some really direct, practical next steps. For yourself, it's about finding a therapist who specializes in this stuff. For a loved one, it's about getting your own support so you can navigate the dynamic. And for today, there's a small but really powerful piece of homework. In one conversation, just try to ask 3 questions and really listen to the answers before you talk about yourself. And look, the goal of that little homework assignment isn't to be perfect at it. The goal is just to notice. Notice the anxiety that bubbles up when you're not the one performing. That active noticing, of just watching yourself with honest eyes, that's the first real step. That's where the work begins. To finish up, the source leaves us with a really provocative thought for the world we live in now. I mean, we live in a culture, especially on social media, that rewards a lot of these behaviors, right? The performance, the drama, the constant stream of metrics telling us who's watching. So it begs the question, where does the social media feed end and the disorder begin? So, in a world that is screaming for our performance 24/7, maybe finding some value in the quiet moments, away from any audience, maybe that's one of the most important things any of us can do. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.